Hello everyone, welcome back to Electronics Prepper, the channel where we try to learn as much as possible about electronics to become more self-reliant with technology and prepare for the future. Today's video is going to be more of an inspiration kind of video. I will not show you something in particular. I will not present to you a circuit or a device. That will happen soon this month, but for the moment I thought of talking a little bit about the importance of basically recovering components from old devices that we no longer need. And yes, believe it or not, many of the devices that we have, the electronic devices that we have, when they break, they don't break completely, just something inside of them breaks, and most of the other components are still good enough to be used. So we could potentially recover some of them in order to use them later at a completely different project. Now, of course, not all of the components can be recovered, and not all of the components are worth being recovered. However, there are some of them that I consider they are worth, they are important, and above all, it is more of a psychological thing to start to basically add to our daily mentality, especially for those of you who are in the West and are very, very much consumed by the consumeristic mentality. You are used to just throwing things away to the trash and just buying something new, which, yes, it's something that sadly the manufacturing companies force us to do, since they no longer encourage the fixing of our devices. They no longer release schematics on the web and so on and so forth. However, those of us who are preparing for what's going to happen in the future, those of us who will make some choices and not others, those of us will benefit from having some skills, some abilities, and some mental, I don't know how to call it, more of a mental preparation to basically be used to the idea of recovering certain components from older devices. Not necessarily devices that we own, but sometimes we may just receive a device from someone else, or sometimes we might just get in contact with someone else. It may be someone from our family, or someone, a neighbor from our block or whatever, and that person might not know anything about electronics, but he might be willing to just give us something that he considers to be junk, he considers to be garbage. But if we know that we can recover things from those devices, then of course we can benefit from those things. So it will be good for us to get in the habit of at least being aware of what could potentially be recovered and from what device, just so we know how valuable a device is or how valuable it is not. So this is pretty much what I'm going to be discussing briefly in this video, and this is a sort of this video basically both comes to you as an inspiration, but in turn this video was inspired by the fact that I had a broken PC motherboard that I wanted to recover some components, and initially I couldn't. It was difficult, but today I found a way. So this is what drove me to make this video. Now, before I dive deeper into the details, please allow me to speak a few words about the sponsor of this video and to thank them for sponsoring this video and my channel recently, PCBWay. They are leading PCB manufacturer with PCB capabilities, PCB assembly capabilities, and many others such as CNC machining, 3D printing with plastic or injection molding. They can help us build our most difficult projects. You can easily get an instant quote for PCB manufacturing from their website's front page, upload the Gerber files, and have your PCBs created in just 24 hours. Like I said, if you need more for your projects, they offer PCB assembly services with manufacturing direct pricing, so you can have your PCBs delivered with components soldered on them. This way you don't have to do the tedious work yourself. In some other cases, you might want to do the work with SEMEDE components. They can offer you SEMEDE stencils in that case, so you can just solder the components yourself. You can finish your design in whatever design software you favor, upload all the necessary files, and you'll be contacted by one of their professional representatives after they manually review your project, offering you one-on-one customer service to make sure that your circuits get fabricated just the way you want. If you're building a circuit for a device that will need a case, they can help you with 3D printing or injection molding services to have your custom-made plastic case, or CNC machining services to help you with a custom metal case. All you need to do is go to PCBWay.com, the link is in the description. Thank you PCBWay for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to what I want to show you about recovering components. Now, like I said, I had this motherboard that you see on the screen right now. This is a pre-recorded video. I had it lying around for quite some time. Initially, I knew for a fact that I want to at least try to get the inductors, so basically the coils. There are quite a lot of them on the motherboard. I wanted to try to get the electrolytic capacitors and, if possible, the medium power transistors, because there are some medium power MOSFETs that are clearly visible on the motherboard, at least on the front of the motherboard, and basically I knew that there is a good chance that they would still work, and that I basically wanted to desolder them. Now, I struggled for quite a bit of time because sadly these kinds of motherboards, or I don't know, at least the one that I had here, requires quite a lot of heat in order to melt that solder and basically be able to release the components. And initially I tried with my usual soldering gun. I also have a workstation with a soldering iron, but it's quite low power, just 30 watts if I remember correctly. And some hot air blower. None of that worked. So in the end I realized that I still had somewhere lying around a couple of these very old, very big soldering irons, like the one that you see here in this picture. The soldering iron that sits on the entire motherboard, and it's basically the size of the entire motherboard. And it has a pretty big head, but overall it has quite a lot of electrical power. This is important because the more power we have, it means that the more this head will stay at the proper temperature, and it will help us desolder our components, whereas low power soldering irons will have this problem that as soon as you put the head onto the metal surface that you want to desolder, then most of that heat will be just absorbed into the board, into that particular component. And let's not forget that coils are essentially just thick copper wires. So at least the coils that are used in these kinds of motherboards, so they will just suck your heat from your soldering iron. They will suck the heat away very quickly, and if you have a low power soldering iron, just your average soldering iron, that heat will just be absorbed, and it will be impossible for you to desolder anything. But if you happen to have one of these very old soldering irons used back in the lamp era, what we call lamp is what you call vacuum tubes. Back in the era when devices were not made of semiconductors, they were all made with vacuum tubes and very large resistors, capacitors. Everything was large, everything was big. They used to employ such a soldering iron to do the work that they needed to. This is good enough for recovering components from such a modern motherboard that requires a lot of heat. Okay, so I used such a soldering iron, and yeah, I have to admit that work was very easy. It was a lot easier than I thought, and I'm not saying it's a piece of cake. You will still need to do quite a bit of work, and it's gonna be a bit tricky because these components are very easy to break. The coils are wrapped inside, or perhaps I should say around the copper wire of the coils. They pour some sort of ferrite material which is easily breakable. So we need to take care of not to push or pull those coils too hard, otherwise we will break them. I did break a couple of them, but overall, you know, using such a soldering iron and a little bit of care and patience will definitely allow us to desolder what we want from these motherboards. We will also need to use a bit of extra solder to put on those wires that we want to desolder, because those wires typically contain very little amounts of solder on the board, and that will make it difficult. Even with such a big soldering iron, it will make it difficult because there wouldn't be enough mass to basically raise the temperature and keep the temperature raised. So we will need to use a bit of extra solder. This is why you see the yellow solder roll to the left of the screen. But once we manage to you know, to raise the temperature and keep it raised for both wires of the coils that we want to desolder and also the capacitors, then work will be relatively easy, and we will be able to take away, if we are careful enough, we will be able to take away all of the coils and all of the electrolytic capacitors on such motherboards. And it will be also possible, I do not know if I captured this on video, so I will try to jump ahead a little bit. It will also be possible for us to desolder those MOSFET transistors that are typically on the front. Yeah, they are not on this particular recording, but doesn't matter. The idea is that this is nice because nowadays these coils, they can actually cost quite a bit. So if I go to one supplier, of course I cannot search for the same identical types of coils, because, you know, these manufacturers get their coils from other places, from other suppliers that are probably not selling to the average person. But if we are to search for a similar coil, a similar inductor, like a 5 amp inductor, 3 microhenries or so, we see that the prices start at around 15 euro cents, and they go up pretty quickly to some 20 euro cents, and then later to 40, 50 euro cents, and so on. And so yeah, it might not sound like a lot, but it is, especially if you want to buy several of them. It's not necessarily a money problem, but if we are able, and this is just one manufacturer, but for instance this other manufacturer, You know, this other manufacturer starts at more than 30 cents per piece. That is with VAT and custom taxes, you know, and it easily goes to 50 cents to 1 euro and so on and so forth. Now, it's not necessarily a matter of money, but from such a motherboard you can easily recover something like 15 or around 15 inductors that will be in good shape in the end. I mean, after all, they are just a copper wire. As long as you don't break these outside cases, which again, they are very easy to break, but as long as you don't break them, you know, if from a single motherboard you can recover more than 10 of these coils, then it's something. Why not? I also recovered about 11 medium power transistors, most of them being MOSFETs, but I will have to do some proper testing on them. I tested them quickly on one of those cheap multi-testers, but I will need to do some more proper testing. They all seem to be in good functioning shape. And also I have recovered a whole bunch of electrolytic capacitors that, again, they are not very expensive, but this can be a lucrative work, especially when you have multiple of such boards lying around. They are partially broken. Of course, such motherboards will not be able to be fixed, so why not? The capacitors are with a bit of a question mark. I have them here in two groups because I've actually tested them before making this video. For me, out of all of the capacitors that I recovered, only these 6 were good, truly good. And these other ones were decent, okay-ish for some projects that are not very pretentious, but not as good as these ones. And there were a few capacitors that were completely broken, and I just threw them away to the trash. They don't even appear here in this picture. I will talk soon about a device that we can build to test capacitors, something that I haven't seen quite often on the internet or on YouTube. Something that is basically inspired from Mr. Carson's lab. Those of you who watch all sorts of electronics channels, you perhaps know Mr. Carson's lab, the channel, and well, the guy behind the channel. So I will come soon with a schematic for a capacitor tester that is inspired from his work, but in the end it turned out to be an original design because I haven't copied him. Anyway, I'll talk about that more in a future video. The point is, you know, in our lab, especially for the purpose of preparing for the future, we need to have some devices with which we should be able to test various components that we recover, right? From all sorts of boards and all sorts of devices, because we need to test if they are still good or not. I have done the mistake of using some electrolytic capacitors in the past for a device. Actually, it wasn't as much as a mistake. They were tested, and initially they were good, but a few months after I started working with that device, they broke completely, so I had to replace them because they were really old. And so yeah, so we need to at least perform some tests on some components just to see what is still good enough and what needs to be just thrown to the trash. Anyhow, I will be talking about that more in the future. One of the most important things that I want to stress about in this video is the necessity of having at least one of these very old, really large soldering irons. This is perfect for, and this is actually needed for this kind of work to be performed. Now, aside from this, let me talk to you a little bit more about what kind of devices we could salvage, or what kind of components we could salvage from what other devices that break. Again, a device never breaks completely, it breaks only just parts of that device, and some other parts stay in pretty good shape, especially some components that are not semiconductors. They are almost indestructible, or some of them quite indestructible. So they are worth something when they break, okay? And we shouldn't just throw them away to the trash. When I say trash, I mean both the dumpster bin or give them away to a so-called proper recycling company. Companies don't do proper recycling. They just try to break everything into small pieces. They try to melt everything and just extract the raw materials out of our devices, which is stupid and which is not proper recycling. So this is what I'm talking about. It is worth us doing proper recycling of at least some components before we give everything, give the rest to a recycling company or just throw it away to the trash. So let's take it step by step. First of all, I will be talking a lot from my personal experience, what I've managed to recover so far. Power supplies, we can take power supplies from anywhere, really. From old computers, both desktop and laptop. Desktop computers are, I would say, more valuable. At least the power supplies in desktop computers are more valuable. Even if they are broken, even if the power supply herself does not work anymore, we can definitely recover all sorts of coils that are pretty much indestructible, and I don't think I've seen a coil be the one that's burned. We can recover those high frequency transformers. Even if the coils of those transformers are burned, the core of those transformers are still valuable, and they are worth quite a bit. If you try to buy one of those cores, you will see that it's not exactly cheap. So we could potentially take those cores and form other coils around those cores and basically reform a new high frequency transformer for a new power supply. So that can be taken. We could also take electrolytic capacitors if they are still good enough. We can also take the power components such as power transistors, thyristors or triacs. If they are still good enough, we can definitely use them. We can desolder them easily and reuse them in other projects. And this stands true for laptop power supplies as well. Typically laptops come with one of those plastic boxes power supplies that are more like rechargeable, a charging power supply for the batteries of the laptop. It doesn't matter, in essence it's still a switch mode power supply, and the same discussion can be had about just like power supplies from desktop computers. We can take power supplies from printers as well. Most of the times printers, of course, printers do need a power supply of their own, and from what I've seen many times, that power supply tends to be placed in a different board than the board with the microcontroller and all sorts of other digital circuitry. So we can take power supplies from printers as well. Of course, from old UPSs. Well, the UPS is himself a power supply, so yeah, the same discussion applies. It has all sorts of power transistors, triacs, and thyristors. If they are not burned, we can definitely reuse them. They have pretty large low frequency transformers that are also good for various projects. They might also have some power resistors and of course some electrolytic capacitors. So again, the same discussion happens. And of course, last but not least, music and video players. DVD players, Blu-ray players, I don't know, all sorts of stereo music players, whatever, including televisions. They all have power supplies, they all need power supplies, so we can recover those power supplies. And if those power supplies still work, we have a choice of leaving that power supply intact and just reusing that power supply in a different project that we are building, as she is, you know. Of course, we will need to do a little bit of work to... first, we need to measure the voltages that that power supply gives, and we will need to use some sort of electronic load, even just a very rudimentary artificial load, to determine the maximum current for each of those voltages. But that's not difficult, yeah, we can definitely make use of that. And I forgot to put on the list, but why not? Mobile phones and tablets, they all have power supplies. They're not inside of them, but they are, you know, whatever you use to recharge their batteries. That 5 volt, 1 amp or 2 amp power supplies, those are power supplies that you can just use as they are. You don't even need to get inside of their electronic circuitry, you know. Other than that, we can recover various accumulators, and what we call accumulators is what you call rechargeable batteries, from phones, tablets, or anything else that might have such a thing. But phones and tablets are most often use cases of accumulators. If those accumulators are good enough, we can definitely reuse them in other projects that we want to be mobile. I have started developing charging and protection circuits for accumulators, and I will continue to do so. So in the near future, I will show you an improved circuit for charging an accumulator and protecting its discharge. So stay tuned on this channel. Number 3 on my list, I have been recovering things from washing machines. Well, so far I've only had one washing machine that I was given. I could recover all sorts of relays, which are, again, not exactly cheap. They're not super expensive either, but when you can recover, I don't know, 5 or 8 relays just from a single washing machine, all of the sudden, you know, the idea is nice, especially since most, if not all of those relays actually resist 220 volts. They are made to switch to 120 volts, or well, 230, 240, or if you're in America, half of that. Anyway, they are definitely nice to recover if you have the option. All sorts of power transistors, thyristors, and triacs are also part of washing machines. You can recover them if they are still working. You can use them. Of course, electrolytic capacitors, just like with any other device. And from a washing machine, you can also recover the motors and valves. There's at least one big motor that, well, spins the entire washing machine. There might be other smaller motors for other purposes, and of course water admission valves. And there's also the water pump that pumps water out of the washing machine. You can, of course, if they are still good enough, you can recover them and use them in other projects. From microwave ovens, I've had the chance of finding a few of them to the trash. Of course, we can recover the main transformer. As he's not going to be usable because he basically generates 2000 or 3000 volts or so, and that's, well, not good for most of our projects. But it wouldn't be completely impossible to basically redo the windings And this is something that I will attempt. I have two of them at home, two of these microwave oven transformers. I will attempt to create other transformers to basically redo the windings and have different voltages on the output. There are all sorts of other electronic components that we can recover from them. Probably something that the others don't include, but microwave ovens typically do. They have some LED displays, 7-segment digits, you know, and they, from what I've seen, they are typically LEDs. They are rarely using LCDs, so those could be, you know, repurposed for another project that we might use. And the turntable also has a motor that can be taken and reused in other projects. Right, from printers, like I've said, we could take power supplies, but also printers have motors as well. Whether they're inkjet or laserjet printers, they have some motors. Those are, if I remember correctly, step-by-step motors, but still they are good, they are pretty strong. We could use them in some other projects. And like I said, from pretty much anywhere we can take coils, inductors, medium and high power transistors, or electrolytic capacitors. So this is not a super comprehensive list, but I would say these are the main things that we can take from, you know, the usual electronic devices that we have in and around the house. So it is good to just have in mind the fact that we can do this. Whether you will want to do this often or not at all, it's up to you. What I can definitely say, you know, to the ones of us who understand where humanity is going and what are we preparing ourselves for, this is going to become quite a thing in the future. You know, recovering any useful thing from any useful device will definitely be something that I think those of us who have enough skills, because, you know, let's face it, most people don't have the necessary skills, abilities and tools to do electronics, but those of us who do have, we will probably be doing this in the future. So, like I said, this video is more for, you know, inspiration, more like an influencer kind of video, just joking, but anyway, I thought it would be nice for me to come here and to present these informations to you. Maybe they will be useful to some of you who perhaps don't yet know them already. And like I said, try to get your hands on one of these very large soldering irons. In some cases, these are really, really good to have, you know, very high power soldering iron to just melt away and keep at a relatively constant temperature any piece of solder. So, thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the contents. A share, a like and a subscribe, they are free and they are helping the channel grow and get promoted to other people who might be interested. I will see you soon in the next video when we will try to move forward with the battery management system built with discrete components. That will be a bit better than the first version that I made recently and I presented. So once again, thanks a lot for watching my videos and I will see you soon in the next one. Bye bye.